So my talk will be on projected future regional climate change scenarios and potential impacts on regional agriculture and food security. So the assignments here are two. I think the first one is to look into what the future looks like in terms of climate projections, in terms of the changes that we expect in the coming 40, 30 years. And then to look into the possible impacts of those changes on agriculture and food security. So before we jump to the projections, I think it would be important to see that climate is a major driver of food security, particularly in Africa and particularly in the eastern part of Africa, where climate variability and change is a major driver of almost what we do in agriculture and natural resources. So the issue here is this driver has got its own role, but impacts are actually a combination of several factors. So we shouldn't undermine that. Even if climate is a trigger, the actual impacts on food security are a result of several interacting factors in that. So we have to look at, so there are always weather vagaries, and this affects production, and then this also is influenced by prices, imports, exports, and also the general infrastructure situation in a given country, the economic, political, social, technological situation that are in place within a given country, and the state or corporate market situation, and the systemic situations that are amplifying or mitigating factors that are involved here, including the safety nets, including aid and all that. So all that combined will affect then food security. So in the next part of my presentation, when I talk about impacts, I would like to remind the audience that climate is one of, or the major driver, but it is not the only one that affects everything. So it is a trigger for all those that happens. So when it comes to the projections for East Africa for the period 2050, there are a lot of studies conducted in specific countries, in specific situations. And in fact, these changes that we expect in the coming, say, 2050 or after 40 years, would be 30 years would be different for each country and within agroecological regions within a given country. But I think when we generalize as a region, East Africa, then there are studies that have been conducted to look into the general or aggregate impact of climate and its projections in the East Africa region. So my focus will be here is specific to the region. And luckily, recently, colleagues from USAID have compiled the studies that have been conducted by different researchers in the Eastern African component and provided the East African climate profile. And my presentation will focus on those ones. So the first thing is that, as expected and has been talked in many occasions, there will definitely be increased temperatures. And by 2050, up to 3 degrees Celsius warming is expected. And this will be, again, affecting the region. So on average, the region is expected to experience a temperature increase of between 1 to 3 degrees Celsius, which is a lot in terms of biological terms, in fact. And then there will be also increased frequency and duration of heat waves in many parts of the region, particularly in Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Sudan will be hotter than usual in terms of temperature. When you look at, again, the projections in terms of rainfall or precipitation, there are mixed reports. In fact, different researchers reported different results for different regions or different countries. But in general, most of the ensemble results indicate a relative increase in the region in terms of rainfall, particularly the JJS season. Which is, and this increase is higher for Ethiopia and Kenya in general. But there are shifts in terms of seasonality for much of the region, particularly the rainfall that is expected in October or December is going to be increasing, but the March-May precipitation is projected to decrease in many parts of the region. And there was also an increase in the inter-seasonal and interannual rainfall variability within each season as well. So that are unequivocal projections for the region. In addition, if we look at the climate extremes and seasonal level rises, particularly those countries in East Africa that have got coastal areas such as Tanzania, Somalia, Sudan, there are also issues there. So when you look at, again, these extremes, I think one of the most striking thing, as our previous speaker talked about the historical trends, there will also be more intense climate extremes in the coming years as well. So there will be increased frequency and intensity of heavy precipitation events, especially in most projections indicate this will be extreme in Ethiopia and Tanzania. Intensified drought occurrences in terms of intensity as well as frequency, and also disappearance of the region's glaciers, which have been visible in the highlands of East Africa, particularly such as Mount Kilimanjaro, and some mountains, Mount Kenya, and in Ethiopia as well. So those will disappear, and also those areas with vast areas of coastal areas, such as Tanzania, Somalia, and some of the Sudan areas, there will be sea level rises of up to 46 centimeters projected by 2050. So I think if this is the projection, so what does it mean, or what are really these implications in terms of agriculture and food security, in fact? So the coming few slides, I'll look into what are really the implications of those changes that we have already looked at in the above 3 slides. So I think the first visible impact would be on crops, definitely. You know that the region is a major breadbasket and many crops are growing, and it's a center of diversification of many plant species. But I think these rising temperatures, increased heat, shifting seasonal rainfall patterns, increased frequency and intensity of heavy rainfall, and in some areas sea level rise will have multidimensional impacts, including in some cases there will be crop failures, reduced yields and quality. There are studies using climate projected data as well as process-based models indicate that most of the crops will experience a yield reduction of between 5 to 46% for most of the dominant crops in the region, except in some cases, cassava is found to be the most resilient one. In fact, that it was a study say. But I think in other cases, there is also suitability of, changes in suitability of agroecological zones. A prominent example is a study on coffee in Ethiopia and Uganda indicate that the coffee suitability areas will be, most of the most suitable areas, 80% will be lost by 2050 unless any adaptation measures are taken. So, and for so many crops, some of the lowland crops will be, climbing up into the highlands, and those which are adapted to the highland areas, what we call them temperate crops such as wheat, barley, and others will be highly confined to the top altitude areas of the region. As the previous speaker mentioned, there will be increased incidence of pests and diseases in many ways. Some of them are unknown ones. For example, some examples already mentioned, the maize lethal necrosis disease, the fall armyworm, the yellow and stem rests of wheat and barley, Livestock borers and coffee berry, all and others will be more devastating. Even some unknown disease may be even appearing in the coming 20, 30 years. So again, heavy intensity rainfall will cause also some flooding, heavy rainfall, and will this affect again most of the region's production. If we look at again in terms of impact on livestock, again, there will be also multidimensional impacts. Most of the impacts that are related to livestock are related to feed availability, physiological stress in terms of production, physiological processes, feed availability, water availability, and diseases and pests. So this will be again associated with this increase in temperature and heat waves and shifting seasonal patterns and also climate extremes. So in some areas there will be some reduced livestock production, growth rates, milk production because of heavy heat stress situations, and also in terms of maintaining food items such as milk in those situations, and also the degradation of rangelands and availability of fodder, early drying of some of the seasonal waters, and also depletion of groundwater resources could be there, and also restrictions in the case of pastoral mobility will also affect the production and productivity of livestock, and also, in fact, increased outbreak of some pests and diseases that are already mentioned by the previous speaker, but also new ones could appear. When we look at, again, another area which, in terms of impact, is the water resources. In fact, this year we're witnessing heavy rainfall because of the extremes. That this is not a normal year. This is a very wet year, which is part of the extreme component of climate change. And we've seen floods in Ethiopia, in Sudan, and in some parts of the pastoral areas as well, which are not expected to be flooded this time. So I think the impact is also multidimensional here in terms of water resources. There could be reduced river flow and increased water shortages in some areas, particularly the Blue Nile initiative area is projected to face some reduction in terms of water supply. Also, climate change could affect water quality because these heavy rainfalls can pollute water resources by creating erosion and leaching nutrients and put them in water points. Increased risk of waterborne diseases such as typhoid, cholera, bilharzia, diarrhea, and even mosquito situations, even migrating from the lowland to the highlands. So the flood damage, as I've already mentioned, is expected to aggravate in some areas. That doesn't mean that there is too much water. It's because of the intense situation that happens once or twice in a year. And also saltwater intrusion in some coastal aquifers of the region, the one countries I mentioned already. And then finally, I think we can also look at that climate can also affect the human health and food security in general. These are very interrelated. Because of these extremes, there will be some problems related to increased mortality and morbidity related to heat stress, particularly during some of the months, particularly between October to May, June, very high temperature area in the region. And this is expected to be very high in the coming years. So increased downing and displacement related to inland and coastal flooding, the one we are witnessing this year, increased poverty, food insecurity, and malnutrition caused by crop losses or diseases related to this one, which also affects human health and their food security. And then increased risk of vector-borne diseases, which all affect this one. So it's a lot in terms of looking at each sector. Also, climate change affects the infrastructure that also affects the input-output market for agriculture, but I'm not going to deal with that. And then in general, the ecosystems will be also affected. Again, climate change will have multidimensional impacts here as well. So in terms of biodiversity loss, environmental degradation, loss of native vegetation, and also even appearance of wildfires that could also engulf some of the protected areas in the region. The region is very well known for its parks and natural resources, but this could be also highly influenced by the changes in the ecosystem services that are highly influenced by climate variables. So if we look at all this in short, then I think all this has got an economic impact in general. A very good study that indicates the economic impact of climate change by 2050 indicates that Africa would lose 4.7% of GDP on average, and the East Africa region particularly could lose, 2 to 4% of the GDP depending on the country because of the climate change. So this has got not only, physical or biological impacts, but the economic impact is also huge as projected here. So in general, when we summarize what we've said above, then there are projections increase that there will be hotter situations and some uncertain precipitation trends over the region. But very clear is that extremes will increase, such as droughts, floods, dry spells, and also some rises in coastal areas. And this will have got a multidimensional effect on crop production, livestock, water resources, health and food security situation, even the infrastructure we talk about, and ecosystem services. So all this will definitely affect the region in terms of economy, in terms of livelihoods, and in terms of its competitiveness compared to other regions in the globe in general. So when we come back to the slide that we started with, then this issue of climate will lead to, unstable food security situation in the region, which leads to, as we can see even from the past trends, is that it could lead to, when the food security situation is highly affected, it leads to displacement, conflict, and migration. And we've seen that so many people are migrating out of the region, traveling to other countries, even drowning in the oceans and seas to cross other countries. So it is a major impact. And that is why we said that the climate is a major driver of food security in the region. So finally, the final slide is this one. I think this is real and we cannot really contemplate on what will happen. But I think what we should think now is what we can do to reverse the situation, or at least to adapt and live with it. So building resilience is a key for ensuring food security in the region. And there has to be adaptation efforts that need to be done to build resilience in the region. And to do this, there is no only shortcuts. There is no only one shortcut. There has to be an integrated technological, institutional, and policy interventions to at least build resilience in the region. So countries need to be, active in order to look at policy options that provide innovation, that enhances innovations, practices, and in business, that there has to be also technological innovations, particularly climate smart ones. And also we have to be also very good in strengthening institutions that has been even traditional institutions that have been left, but still have a role to play in terms of building resilience. So there has to be an integrated effort in the region, and there has to be willingness to do that, to avert this. So that is all what I have. Thank you very much.